It's easy to stand on the sidelines and to criticize this proposal, and it's perhaps even politically expedient to stand on the sidelines and criticize this proposal. But let me make one thing very clear, Mr. President. Advocating against this tax proposal is to advocate for a tax increase.
Senator John Thune jumping off the sidelines and into the 2012 playing field with a rocket aimed right at a certain other potential presidential candidate.
Would that be Mitt Romney you're talking about? Top Line starts right now.
Twitter.com/Rick Klein, Twitter.com/John Carl. Mr. Carl, what do you know? Capitol Hill still buzzing right up to the deadlines.
Yeah, it's great. This first top line, not kosher. Plenty of pork in this new bill the Democrats just dropped yesterday, a $1.1 trillion spending bill to keep the government going for the next year, or at least till September 30th. And Rick, this thing has got about, we're still adding them up, but it looks like about $10 billion in those earmarks. You remember earmarks?
I do, and I also remember that promise to get rid of earmarks, but I guess technically that pledge doesn't begin until January. What's interesting here is you have a number of folks who swore off earmarks altogether who have projects in this, including the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell. He's among those that's got special projects salted into this bill.
But Rick, today, I mean, Rick, to be fair, he was for them before he was against them.
Fair enough. Duly noted. Next up today, cutting and running. The tax deal is on the move. The Senate is expected to approve the package later today. The House will get it by the end of the night tonight and move on to consideration. There's still a lot of angst among Democrats about this tax deal, but they see the writing on the wall. They are not inclined to hold this up in a major way. There may be some tweaks, but that's about all they can expect, John. There's no chance for a major rewrite. Democrats just have to chalk this one up to the loss column if you're House Democratic leaders.
I don't even think you're going to see tweaks on this. I mean, Republicans have drawn a very firm line saying that no changes, this is a deal is a deal, we want it as is. And I got to say, one other footnote to this is victory Bill Clinton. I think that one of the turning points in this in terms of Democratic support in the Hill was that appearance in the White House press room of President Bill Clinton. He sure enjoyed it, and they seem to be influenced by it. Indeed. Next up, Rick, Thune in. We heard at the top of the show John Thune talking about the tax deal. His comments came right after we saw in USA Today an op-ed by Mitt Romney coming out against the tax deal. A lot of Republicans up here really upset by that because Romney had been quiet about this throughout the whole debate. Then finally it's a done deal. The Republicans are on board, and Romney comes out against it. Thune's broadside was aimed right at Romney, no question about it, and I think it's a sign of things to come.
Yeah, no, he didn't obviously specify who that was aimed against, but I think it's a candidate or potential candidate whose name rhymes with Quit Chomney. I'm not sure. We'll get back to you on that. And lastly today, Foley folds. The word from former Congressman Mark Foley of Florida is that now is not the time for him to run for mayor of West Palm Beach, Florida. It, of course, does raise the question, when is the time for a disgraced congressman who sent titillating text messages to congressional pages to return to public office? That is left unsaid in Mr. Foley's statement.
All right, nice use of the word titillating. Anyway, Rick, I want to introduce our guest. We're very honored to have with us here somebody who we can still call Senator Judd Gregg. Thanks for joining us.
John, thanks for having me.
So I want to start right with this omnibus bill, and I know you very much are against this. But even the great fiscal conservative Judd Gregg has earmarks in this thing. So how do we explain that?
Because this basically was put together before the moratorium was put in place, but equally important, and a point that's been missed, is that this is at a freeze level. You've got to give Dan Inouye credit. His original mark on this bill was $26 billion higher than when it came out, because the Republican members of the Appropriations Committee, of which I am one, said we're not going to support any appropriations bills unless they come in at what's known as the Sessions-McCaskill freeze level. He hit that mark. Now, you can argue that earmarks are bad. I don't happen to believe that. I believe earmarks are the right of the Congress, as long as they're done within a tight top line, so that you don't use the earmark to exceed the top line. And as long as they're disclosed, and as long as you know who the member of Congress is who's asked for them.
So is there any chance you vote yes on this bill?
No. No, because you can't bring a 1,900-page bill to the floor. Even though I admire the fact that the chairman brought it down to a freeze level, It's got too much policy in it that I don't know what the policy is, and a lot of other people who aren't members of the Appropriations Committee haven't had a chance to vet it. It's just too big a bill to bring across the floor this late in the session. It should have been brought in parts. That's the way appropriations bills are supposed to be done. But this Democratic Congress is so dysfunctional. They've done no appropriations bills. First time I can ever remember that happening. Should have come across the floor so policy could have been debated, or this bill should have been on the floor for a fair amount of time so that there could have been amendments and policy discussion.
So even if it includes these earmarks that you had requested, I mean, what do you do in that circumstance? How do you explain to people these are things that you think are important priorities? They're part of the bill. Do you do the ribbon cuttings nonetheless, or do you try to find a way to not accept an earmark given the current environment?
Well, you know, I have never been opposed to earmarks as long as they're done within, as I said, a tight top-line budget. It isn't the earmark that's causing the deficit; it's the exceeding the budget spending which causes the deficit. In fact, if an earmark is eliminated and there's no top-line budget set, there's no fixed number, a cap as it's called, then the earmark gets spent on something else. I mean, if you eliminate earmarks, you don't save any money. There's $16 billion of earmarks spent every year. That's 1% of the deficit approximately. And if you eliminate them all, you don't reduce the deficit by $16 billion unless you take the cap down or the top line down by $16 billion. That would be great if that happens, but it's unlikely that it's going to happen on a freeze budget.
So, Senator, I want to ask you, one of the other big pieces of unfinished business up here is the START treaty. The president has talked about how important this is. The Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Condoleezza Rice has come out in favor of it, along with a whole host of other, I think, all living secretaries of state. And yet we have Jim DeMint is now out saying that he's going to force this thing to be read, every word of it, on the floor of the Senate, and every word of the omnibus to be read. Obviously, steps that would make it impossible to actually get a vote. What do you think about tactics like that? Do you think that's...
Well, that's the beauty of the Senate. It's the place where you get debate and discussion, and it was set up to be the ultimate check in our constitutional form of government, which is a check and balance form of government, where the minority's rights are protected. And any member of the Senate has the right to do something like that. I don't deny him his right.
You think it's appropriate, though? And would you like to see this START treaty actually get a vote?
I'm leaning heavily towards the START treaty. I think the administration's done a good job on it. But there are people in the Senate who are very substantive and thoughtful on this issue, John Kyle being the leader primarily, who say that they want to have the chance to discuss it at length in a calm atmosphere, in a thoughtful atmosphere, and they will give a date certain. John has said, I will give you a date certain when we will vote on this, and it's sometime in January, I think, is the agreement that he's proposed. That makes a lot more sense than taking up something this big during the Christmas week. I mean, this isn't a good time to do something that's really this important a piece of substantive legislation. I'd like to have a chance to vote on it, yes, because I won't next year. But I also want it to be done correctly, and the correct way to do it is to have it on the floor, have it discussed, have it done in an orderly way, and have a date certain for a vote so the administration doesn't feel it's being gamed on the issue of a final vote.
Senator Gregg, I want to ask you about this tax deal right now that the Senate is set to approve. House Democrats still want to make some changes. Is there any wiggle room? Do Republicans have any appetite to give it all if House Democrats come back and make some amendments to this?
No. This is an agreement that was reached between the President, members of the House leadership, the Senate leadership on the Republican side, and some Democratic senators. I think it's the way we should govern, you know. It's about time we had the President and the Congress sitting down and doing something jointly in a bipartisan way. This is a good sign for next year. I think there are a lot of other areas that you can get bipartisan cooperation on, such as energy, such as tax reform, maybe even immigration. This is a good step forward. Let's not unravel it by having a few people who are disgruntled, as I am about parts of it, suddenly say, well, if you don't do it my way, we're not going to participate and you got to change it.
A good step forward that includes about $900+ billion in added deficits.
Well, that's only if you accept the argument that tax dollars are Washington's money. I'm not attracted to that argument. I believe that we are not an undertaxed nation, we're an overspending nation. In fact, if you look at the numbers, they're pretty definitive. Spending in this country in the last 2 years has gone from 20% of GDP to 24, it's headed towards 28. Tax revenues are headed towards their historic norm, which is about 18 to 19% of GDP. We do not need to dramatically raise taxes on the American people to solve our deficit problem. We need to get the spending under control, and specifically the entitlement programs.
All right, Senator
Before
Judd
we let
Gregg.
you go,
thank you, John.
Wait, Rick's got one more.
One last question, Senator.
Yeah.
As you know, the 2012 field is already beginning to take shape. There are debates already being announced in your home state of New Hampshire. Is there any chance at all that you'll be on any of those debate stages in your home state or elsewhere in 2012?
You mean as a candidate?
Yeah, favorite son candidate.
Favorite son
Presumably.
candidate. No, in New Hampshire, we like to have a variety of candidates, so I would seriously doubt that. I expect to be actively involved in the presidential primary. That's the fun of coming from New Hampshire and being
Wait,
involved
but you
in
didn't just rule it out. You didn't rule out
I won't
Judd
rule out
Gregg for
anything in my
president.
future, but
Okay.
let's face it, that's not likely, and I wouldn't expect to be doing that.
All right, Senator Gregg,
Senator-
thank you.